Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jamie Bennett, and along with my colleague Susie DeValle, I'm lucky enough to serve as interim co-CEO of Americans for the Arts. And a huge number of folks from around the country are joining us today for this webinar to dig a little deeper into the recent guidance that the US Department of Education released around arts education and Title I funding. I really just wanted to give my great thanks, not just for everyone for showing up today, but also for all the work that you do all day, every day, making sure that more Americans get more arts education more often. As I was thinking about this webinar today, and particularly the close partnership between the National Endowment for the Arts and the US Department of Education, I realized that sometimes some of us might think about arts education a little too much as an arts issue, and sometimes not enough as an education issue. And what the recent guidance that US DOED has issued really clarifies is that arts is kind of the fourth R, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic, and art. That's a little bit of a groaner, but I think the fundamental principle is sound. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, and instead I'm going to turn things over to someone who can give a proper welcome. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson, President Biden's chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. Chair Jackson, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for inviting me to pop in and say hello as you launched this webinar. I greet you from San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I am with a team of NEA staff for the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies annual meeting, and also the International Federation of Arts Council and Cultural Agencies meeting, also happening here in San Juan. But I did want to take just a moment to let you know how exciting an evolution this is. To have the increased collaboration and coordination with the Department of Education around something that I think is so fundamental and foundational as our young people having access to an excellent arts education, and the strides that we'll be able to make with this evolution in resources and attention directed to this. I'm just thrilled that this is happening. I'm grateful to everyone who had a hand in making this happen, and grateful in advance to everyone who is going to animate this and really make sure that it impacts our communities all throughout the nation. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you will do. Congratulations on this. I feel like it's a new chapter of collaboration with the Department of Ed. And I know there's been longstanding relationships with the department, and the ability to see that grow and strengthen is something that is great cause for celebration. So have a great webinar. Have a great webinar. And I'll send it back to you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Chair Jackson. And Olivia and Tushar, I think you all are going to kick it off from government affairs and lead us into the next conversation.
Thank you, Jamie, for all of your support and advocacy for arts education. And Chair Jackson, thank you so much for joining us and your commitment to the arts and arts education. And thank you all for joining Americans for the Arts and Arts Action Fund as we close out National Arts and Humanities Month. We're pleased to share this great news that on October 2nd, the United States Department of Education issued a letter of guidance to chief state school officers on how federal education dollars can be used for arts education in developing a well-rounded education through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as other areas of federal education law. In 2015, you may know that Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act that created the definition of a well-rounded education which encompasses 21 well-rounded subjects, and that includes arts and music education. And of course, this supports what we as arts advocates have known for a long time, that arts education is a vital part of a child's curriculum. However, allowable uses of federal funding streams can sometimes be broad to allow for local flexibility. So guidance is often necessary to remind local school districts on the way that funds can be used. And again, arts education advocates know this as well. And they know that arts educators and administrators are constantly competing for funding and resources. And so arts education advocates work tirelessly in making the case that guidance was necessary to clearly state that federal funds can and should be used for arts education, whether it be through their member of Congress, perhaps, or directly to the Department of Education. Their impact was clear. And so we are incredibly thankful to have the U.S. Department of Education. We are thankful that they listened and are here today to explain the guidance as well as discuss other initiatives that they're working on to ensure access to a quality arts education. And we're going to follow that with, we're going to follow their presentation with two panels. The first with some amazing arts administrators and local school districts, and then a final panel with some of our great national partners who advocated for this guidance to be issued. We'll drop a link in the chat so you can learn about all of our speakers today. Also, there are question and answer opportunities. So you can see on our slide here, ask questions in the Q&A box. You can also upvote a question that you want to be sure, or that you want to be sure is asked and answered first. We might not get to all of your questions today. If that's the case, an Americans for the Arts staff member will follow up with you in the coming days. Again, I'm Tushar Swain. I'm Director of Public Policy. My email is there, as well as Olivia Tarpley's, who you will be hearing from a little bit later on in our webinar. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jennifer Todd, Director of the Well-Rounded Educations Programs Office within the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us today. We're really excited to talk about the different funding streams to support arts education here at the U.S. Department of Education. Today, I am joined by my colleagues, Patrick Rooney, the Director of Office of Formula Grants, and Simon Earl, who is the group leader for the Assistance for Arts Education. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with a message from our secretary, Dr. Miguel Cardona. Sometimes music and the arts are not looked at as part of the primary experience that students should have. It is thought of as an ancillary experience, but music and the arts are a very big part of the education experience for me. In fact, music probably does more to develop critical thinking skills and analytical thinking and improvisation more than many of the other topics we spend time on in school. So I just wanted to start with that because it's so well aligned to the work that we do here at the department in service to the students across the nation. Next slide, please. So today we'll discuss different funding streams at ED that can be used to support arts education. One of those funding streams is the formula grants. These are funds that are directed by Congress to make awards using a formula based on certain criteria that are written into the legislation and program regulations and directly awarded and administered by ED's program office. So grantees are generally SEAs or state education agencies, and SEAs make sub-awards through either a formula or a competitive basis to sub-grantees who are generally local education agencies. So we say LEAs, that includes districts and regional service centers. Next slide, please. Discretionary grants are financial assistance in the form of money awarded by the federal government to an eligible applicant, usually made on the basis of a competitive review process. So I'll first discuss the dedicated funding sources through the discretionary grant funding stream. Note that there are other discretionary grant programs that can also be used to fund and support arts education. I'll let you know where you can find that information. Next slide. And then the next slide. So annual funding is appropriated by Congress to fund the discretionary grant program Assistance for Arts Education. When funds are available for a competition, eligible entities can apply. For AAE, the eligible entities are local education agencies in which 20% or more of the students served by the local education agency are from families with an income below the poverty line. This also other eligible entities include consortiums of such local education agencies, state education agencies, institutes of higher education, museums or cultural institutions, the Bureau of Indian Education, eligible nonprofit organizations, and other private agencies, institutions, or organizations, and eligible national nonprofit organizations. Next slide, please. So AAE is the only dedicated federal funding source for arts education through the U.S. Department of Education. Since 2014, Congress has appropriated over $300 million for the program. And of that total, at least $5 million was targeted for dissemination and evaluation specifically. And over the last 10 years, the AAE program has received an average appropriation of $30 million per year, with a high of $36.5 million in 2023 and a low of 25 in 2014. Next slide, please. And the purpose of the AAE program is to promote arts education for students, including disadvantaged students and students who are children with disabilities, through activities such as professional development for arts educators, teachers, and principals, development and dissemination of accessible instructional materials and arts-based educational programming, including online resources in multiple arts disciplines, and community and national outreach activities that strengthen and expand partnerships among schools, LEAs, communities, or centers for the arts, including national centers for the arts. It is authorized under Title IV, Part F, Subpart 4 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. The AAE program is managed and administered in the Office of Well-Rounded Education Division, overseen by Group Leader Simon Earle and Program Officers Ashley McBride and Sharon Burton. Next slide, please. This slide shows the AAE footprint across the nation that we are always striving to expand. In addition to providing grants to eligible entities, the AAE program also funds the AAE Center that was launched this year in 2024. We welcome you to visit the site to learn more about the AAE program and see examples of the current projects that are funded. This is also where you can find information about other discretionary grant programs at ED that can be used to support arts education. And we will, of course, continue to provide updates and arts education resources on the center website. And the third funding stream within AAE, with that $36.5 million annual appropriation, is funds our interagency partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts to support the Arts Education Partnership. So this partnership has been funded for almost 30 years and continues to provide support and promote AEP as the nation's hub for individuals and organizations committed to making high quality arts education accessible to all U.S. students. Discretionary grants are intended to give entities the opportunity to implement innovative and promising practices that can then be sustained and taken to scale through other funding sources. One of the funding sources that SEAs and LEAs can use to leverage these implementations are the formula funds that are allocated to SEAs on an annual basis. The Dear Colleague letter that was released this month clarified the allowable use of formula funds to support arts education. So I will now turn it over to my colleague, Director of the Office for Formula Grants, Patrick Rooney, who we both worked together with Simon to usher this through with the Deputy Secretary's office, and are so pleased to share this information with you today. He will discuss the formula grants outlined in the Dear Colleague letter and answer some questions you may have about how this can be operationalized. Patrick.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks FTA for inviting us. It's great to see such a large group of participants on the webinar today. The arts education is something that's, it's really near and dear to me personally. I've got 2 high school kids in public schools that are both very focused on arts. One is a senior and she does chorus and loves singing, and the other is in the theater program, and we're actually going to see a performance tonight that she is not in, but her friends are in, and she's in a performance later this year. So it's, I know firsthand the power and the importance of arts education in building community and building confidence, and I see it through my kids, and I'm glad that we've got this letter out and that I can really talk about the importance of arts education and provide a resource to the field for how schools and districts can think about using their federal funds creatively to help support arts education. So I'm going to talk through some of the formula grant programs, some of which I work on, some of which I don't work on. So if you've got specific questions, I may have to phone a friend and get back to you all, depending on what the question is. But in general, I think Jennifer did a good job of laying out formula grants. They are funds that are appropriated by Congress to the department to award to states, and then most of them go directly from states to school districts, again, using a formula laid out by Congress. And then at the local level, the district and the school level, there is a really wide discretion in how those funds are used. And I think that's not always understood or appreciated. So I'm hoping that this letter provides a resource for folks in the community, wherever you are, to have a conversation about the trade-offs and the pros and cons of how you spend different pots of funds under your formula grants, because there really is a lot of discretion. So we'll go to the next slide. I think I covered this. Actually, I meant to go to the next slide. Sorry. So the next slide, we'll talk about Title I, I believe, first. Yes, which is the largest education program. It's $18.4 billion this year. All states receive all these formula grant program funds. Title I goes to about 85% of school districts across the country. It is designed to help support low-income, low-achieving students. A little more than 50% of public schools receive Title I funds. And as that first bullet says, Title I can really be used for anything to help improve the academic performance of kids to meet the challenging academic standards. And within that, schools and districts have a lot of discretion in thinking about how can they design programs. Arts education certainly can fit into that, with thinking about how you can build engagement, how you can build connections, how you can improve student attendance. I don't think I need to sell you on the importance of arts education if you're on this webinar, but it definitely is a tool and a vehicle to consider how to do that. There's 2 main ways people have Title I programs in their schools, so it's worth distinguishing those 2 just for a caveat. A school-wide plan is if the school has 40% or more in poverty, which is generally they use the free or reduced price lunch program to decide if the school meets that threshold. They can operate what's called a school-wide plan. And then your Title I funds at the school level can be used to improve the academic program for all kids who attend the school. So it can really be used to help upgrade the program for everybody. The important caveat here is the school needs to have a needs assessment, and then it has to have a comprehensive plan. And within those pieces, the school can identify arts as a component of something it wants to improve using Title I funds, and then Title I funds can go towards improving that for the whole school. Most schools who have Title I funds are operating a school-wide school plan program. In a targeted assistance plan, which is, again, much less common, those are schools that have smaller percentages of kids in poverty. The funds are required to be focused on improving those kids who are eligible for Title I services. So in that case, you can't operate a program for the whole school, but you can provide supplemental services to the kids who are most at risk of failing or are failing to meet the state standards. I have put a link on here to a letter which is an old letter, but it's referenced in the new letter, but it's still a relevant letter. It's still up on our website. We still encourage people to look at it all the time. It's from 2013, and it really is the best resource we have that highlights how Title I can be used for arts education. I know sometimes when letters are a couple years old, people are less likely to rely on them. Hopefully this new letter, in conjunction with this 2013 letter, can help emphasize that point as people are thinking about how to operate going forward. I know we're in an interesting spot at a time as a nation with schooling. The COVID funds are just about have been obligated and spent for the most part. And there is a real serious conversation that's happening at the local level of how do we decide what to continue funding that we started in the last 3 years with all of the ESSER funding and the American Rescue Plan, and what can we continue? And it is a hard conversation to have at a local level, but we definitely want to make sure people are thinking about all of the ways that they're engaging students and what has been successful, and what data you have or research shows that you are actually helping kids to be involved in their schooling, helping parents and families to be engaged, and what is helping to raise the achievement of kids. And that is that involves some hard trade-offs, but it's an important conversation, and we definitely want arts to be part of that conversation as folks at the local level are making that conversation, making those decisions. All right, going to the next slide. I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker. Title II is a grant to states and then to districts that focuses on professional development for educators, which can be teachers, but also school leaders and others within the building. And it can be very much focused on how to improve arts education, how to infuse arts-focused concepts and approaches into other subject areas to think about how to improve arts as part of the curriculum you're offering in your schools. Title III Part A is a formula grant program, Title II is a $2.2 billion program per year. Title III is a little less than $1 billion per year. It's about 800 million, and it's focused on providing supplemental services for English learners to improve their English language instruction. And it, again, can be used to help support additional supports for those English learners that could include arts education activities. The next slide. Under Title IV, Jennifer mentioned Title IV Part S, but there's also 2 formula grant programs within Title IV. The first is Part A, which is I'm going to blank, the Student Academic Enrichment Grants. And this is particularly focused on arts education. There are a couple different activities that districts have to spend funds on. So you can see here, if a district receives more than $30,000 in Title IV Part A, some of their funds must be used for supporting a well-rounded education, which is a defined term in the ESEA and does include arts education. And then the second program is Title IV Part B, which is the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. This provides grants to states for before and after school and summer learning programs. And unlike the other programs, this one is actually competitive. The states run subgrants to eligible entities, which can be schools or districts, but they can also be private schools or community-based organizations. Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs have a number of subgrants under 21st Century across the country, and they work in conjunction with schools in order to provide academic enrichment programs, which can include tutoring, but it can also include music and arts and theater and all sorts of activities that you'd think about under arts education can all be part of a 21st century program. Next slide. 2 other programs that I don't work on, so want to be cautious I don't overstate things too much. First is IDEA. Under IDEA Part B, which is grants to states and then districts for school-age children to provide special education-related services to help support for school personnel for child and disability in arts-focused courses if it's part of the IEP. And then the second one is Perkins, which is the full name is the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, better known as Perkins, which can be used to develop arts-related career and technical education programs. So arts, audio, video technology, communications, career cluster, all of that could be part of a CTE program that a school could offer using Perkins funds to help build and expand for students. And I think that might be on a slide. Yeah, so with that, I think I'll stop and turn it back to Olivia maybe, or Tushar. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Patrick. And we have a whole host of questions here. So thank you for taking some time to answer those. First question is will there be an assistance in arts education competition in 2025?
So all decisions to run competitions are based on our annual appropriations from Congress. And as you know, we have current grants. So what we do is we look at the amount of funding that is appropriated from Congress and the amount of funding that we need to use to fund the current grants in their subsequent years. And then if there is available funding to run a competition, that's when we are able to do so. So we aren't able to disclose if we're having a competition until we get appropriations. And we always recommend that you look at the grants, the Department of Education grants forecast, because any updates after we get a budget from Congress, sometimes we are able to run competitions with a clause that explains that everything depends on those appropriations. So again, we just really encourage you to watch the grants forecast. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jennifer. Patrick, this question is for you. In talking about the formula grants, are they solely dedicated for arts education? Is it more along the lines of well-rounded funding? Can you go in a little bit more in depth into that?
Yeah, I think I would say for all of the formula grant programs, arts education is an allowable activity, the ones that I described, but there's not funds dedicated necessarily for arts-related activities. It's more a question for the local area to decide how to allocate their funds and what programs they want to fund with the federal grant funds or not. That's a little on purpose, that I can't answer that question more definitively, because the way most formula grant programs work is we want the local folks to be able to make a decision on what makes the best sense in their community for, what is going to engage their students, what is going to improve their achievement, what are the activities that they want to prioritize, but the limited resources that folks have. And so for that reason, we have a list of allowable activities, but then we leave it up to the local level to decide. The one distinction of that is the Title IV Part A funds that I mentioned, where if a district has at least a $30,000 grant, they have to set some of it aside for arts-related activities, for well-rounded activities. Sorry, not necessarily arts, but well-rounded activities, which does include arts programming. So that is a more focused amount of money that a district would have with those funds.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The next question is, has the letter been, so the letter has been sent to, the guidance letter has been sent to chief state school officers. have you had any reaction to that? And are there any other next steps beyond that?
So we provided the letter to the states, and we don't have an easy way to get information out to the 18,000, 20,000 school districts or the 100,000 public schools. So we rely on groups like all of you and other advocates to help spread the word and to share the resource at the local level. So, when you're having those conversations, we want this to be a resource that you have at your disposal, and make sure that your local communities are aware of it. We have put up on our website, we've shared it with states, we have sent it out to groups that we know are interested in the letter. And we've gotten some great feedback. It's great to see so many people on this webinar. I don't know that we have other particular plans at the moment that I'm aware of. I don't know if Jennifer or Simon, you have anything you could add.
No, I think webinars like this and our convenings that we host and attend, we will continue to spread the word. We had just a lot of feedback from the field, many of the arts organizations that are here on the call with us that we meet with on a regular basis about the need to really clarify this information for chief state school officers and for what we're referring to as local education agencies, to be able to advocate for this and for communities and different organizations that represent arts education, can let them know that this is an allowable use of funds. But again, they are local decisions. So it is meeting with those representatives that make these funding decisions, to make sure that arts is part of the conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let's see here. How are nonprofit arts organizations, do they qualify for the AAE program grant or any of the formula grants?
Yes, as far as the discretionary assistance for arts education program, they would be, that's an eligible entity. Again, there are different, I would encourage you to go to our website, because there are different requirements of the areas that you're serving the students you're working with regarding making sure that you are serving underrepresented students, because the focus is on providing equitable opportunities in arts education to underserved students. So there are some caveats, but we encourage you to go to the website and look at the eligible entities section. And Simon has put that information in the chat.
And on the formula grant side, all of the formula grants go from ed to states, and states, with one exception. So all the ones I talked about go from ed to states, and states to school districts, and then to schools. So nonprofits or arts agencies aren't eligible to receive direct funding through any of those formula grants, with one exception. So you would need to partner with a school if you wanted to run, say, I think there was a question about a theater group having a working with a school for a grant. If you meant a formula grant, you would have to, the school would retain control of those funds, and you would have to partner with them to run the program. The 21st Century program is the one that any entity, I think all of the people on this call, any arts agency or nonprofit would be eligible to apply for directly from a state agency, and states run competitions. Not necessarily every year, but most years states run competitions. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your state educational agency to see the schedule for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers competition. You do need to partner with a school. You can actually receive the funding directly, but you are then working with a public school or a district in order to run a program. If it was a theater or an arts program, arts entrepreneurial skills. I've seen other things kind of glancing through the chat where you could run it at your location, but you'd have to make sure you're coordinating with the school. And as part of the application, you'd need to have identified the schools that you'll be working with if you receive a grant from the state.
Thank you for that. So the guidance, it has been sent to chief state school officers. question here is, how do districts and schools know about the funding? Are they contacted, or how does that work?
The formula grants are awarded each year, every July 1st. Congress passes the budget. We don't have a budget yet for the next year, but we will sometime between now and July 1. And we will make awards to each state on July 1 for the following year. So this past July 1, 2024, we made grants that then the state we expect them to use in the 24-25 school year. So then they will run a competition and award their subgrants. We contact the states, tell them the amount of money. We also post the amount of money for each of our programs on our website. And I see someone asked about 21st Century, so I'll pop the link into the chat in a second. And you can see how much money went to each state in each of the past few years. We have a similar chart on the other programs on our website. So you can see, it doesn't tell you how much, we say how much Title I money goes to the state of New York. We don't actually have the allocation for each school district in New York or in any state. You'd have to contact the state educational agency, the New York State Education Department, for example, in that case, to ask for the amount that a particular district has. They will be able to tell you that, and that is public information. So they will tell you that if you have to ask, but you will have to ask them.
Thank you. And then just following up on that, has the guidance that's been issued, the letter, will that make its way to local school districts from chief state officers, or what does that process look like? Does it vary from state to state?
It definitely varies from state to state. I think some states are great about sending out information like this. Some states are, and they do it in different ways. Some states maybe are less good about getting information down from districts to schools. So I would definitely encourage you to consider ways that you could share this and elevate it within your communities and with others who might be interested in this, so your district and your schools know that this is an option. Typically, superintendents have like a weekly or a biweekly, state superintendents have a weekly or biweekly blast that they will send out to all their school districts, and that's how they'll share information like this. But it is a little bit of a game of telephone on our end to know how it gets from us to states, down to districts and schools, to the people who are actually making the decisions. Like, we want to get the information to them, but it's not always easy for us. So your help would be really appreciated.
Great. Final question. Jennifer and Patrick, both of you are parents of students in the K through 12 system. How are some ways that parents can get involved locally to advocate for arts education?
I'd say definitely working with your parent-teacher organizations and looking at what resources are provided by the states for arts education, in addition to what ED provides. The National Endowment for the Arts also provides grants. And I think just staying involved, and I know, as a parent, how difficult that is. It's ironic that you work at the Department of Education, and I'm not going to say how many PTA meetings I've been to this year. But I think just nurturing that love of art and music and understanding how it really just influences your child's education. When we came back from the pandemic, I often share that my kids weren't, they were excited to see their friends, but they weren't like, yay, let's go to math. They were like, let's go to band. Let's go to my art class. Let's go, it's the joy of the arts that motivates so many students. It's so important on so many levels. So personally and professionally, and Simon's on here. He goes to numerous band competitions that run way too late on the weekends that he's shared with us. So we are all very dedicated, both personally and professionally, to arts education, and just want to thank everyone for all that you do. And our contact information is on the last slide. So if you have additional questions, please send them to us, and we are small but mighty teams, and we will get to you as quickly as possible.
the two things I'd add to what Jennifer said is I think it's 100% right. For any school that gets Title I funds, they have to have a parent and family engagement policy, and they have to reserve some portion of their funds for that, developing that policy and then carrying it out and making sure they are holding meetings that parents can attend. So not, during the day when everyone's at work, but meetings that parents can attend where they talk about how they plan to use Title I funds and to get input and feedback from parents and the community. And another, so that's one important way. Another important way is district school boards always have public meetings, generally once a month, that are open to the public, where they talk about things like how they're going to spend their Title I funds or other federal funds. And it's a great opportunity to talk about the trade-offs of how you're making the budget decisions at the local level and to get engaged. I know those meetings can be long and sometimes painful from experience, but they are, that is democracy in action, and it's, definitely encourage you to look into that.
Great. Well, Jennifer, Patrick, Simon, thank you for all of your work in helping to shepherd this guidance along. As you can see by all of the questions, you're not going to find a more passionate group of people than arts education advocates, because we know how important it is for our children. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule today, and I am going to pass it to my colleague Olivia Tarpley to talk about our next panel.
It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all again. We really appreciate your time and you all sharing all of your expertise with us. Our next panel is going to be with two arts educators and administrators that are one from Pittsburgh and one from the Richmond area. So I'm very happy to bring on my colleagues. Nina Unitas from Pittsburgh Public Schools. Nina is the Senior Program Officer for Arts Education. And my other colleague, Christopher Mosley. Christopher is the Education Specialist for Performing Arts in Henrico County Public Schools, which is in Virginia. And thank you both so much for being here today. We're really excited for the conversation. And just to kick it off, hoping that both of you could just tell us a little bit about your story, your arts education story, and how you landed in your current roles.
Well, glad to be here and appreciate being asked to be here. I started my education career as an art teacher. I taught K1 and 2, loved those little peanuts to death. Ended up going into a principalship, which was a interesting journey. So my leadership journey took me into assistant principal, then principal, and then I ended up coming to Pittsburgh Public in charge of visual arts, and am now serving in this capacity as senior program officer for arts ed, and with the sole purpose of serving the young people and families in the district.
Cool, thank you. And good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Again, Chris Mosley here from Henrico County, which is in Richmond, Virginia. It's a suburb of Richmond. My journey began as a passionate elementary music student in band in 3rd grade. And from there, of course, I went to college and later became a music educator. I taught elementary band for 2 years, and then I taught high school band and orchestra for 11 years. And so now this is my 6th year in this role as the performing arts specialist, a job that I started in 2019, which was an interesting year in the world. And my whole commitment is really to just providing a space for underrepresented communities and ensuring that our students have access to all of the things related to the arts, because I know personally it saved my life.
Thank you both. And could you actually just also tell us both of your art forms?
I'm a visual artist, lately dabbling in ceramics because I have a little bit of time after I left being a principal, but trained as a printmaker primarily.
Yep, and for me, just a musician, I'm a trumpeter for a long time, and I still play all the time.
Awesome. Thank you both. So could you talk some about how this new guidance can help administrators to increase access to quality arts education for students, kind of how you see it in your respective districts and maybe even nationally as well?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think the guidance is really just it's a framework for us. You know, it allows our administrators to like set goals for their programs and to just ensure again that we have equitable access to all of the things. The guidance gives us like tangible steps, like a way to actually follow the process and to learn the things that's being presented to us so that we can execute it formally in our school divisions. And I think without the guidance coming from on high, from the Department of Ed, that some of this has been kind of lost in the shuffle. I mean, this is actually not new information, but it's new in this format, being that it's come from Department of Ed and now it's being refocused on.
I'm thinking of like, you know, how Christopher shared, this isn't really, really new information, but the format and the way it's coming out offers me clarity on a level of ignorance I had, because the day-to-day
Right.
ensuring everything we're doing for our faculty and our teachers, and the gerbil wheel per se of public education can make you feel like that's where you are when you have something like this come out that allows me to reflect on my level of ignorance in my position. Like, you know, I get a call from the federal programs coordinator, says, "Oh, we have Title IV funding for you." I'm like, "Okay, great." They tell me what I'm using my Title IV money for. This is helping me in a position where I should know a lot of these things, dig down and ask more questions. So I think that's going to inform the future practices that I see happening in our district.
Thank you both. That's very helpful. And then just to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, what are some of the ways that you all see the guidance enhancing education for students, maybe in a well-resourced district? And on the other hand, how would it impact education for students in an under-resourced district?
Chris, you want to go ahead? I'll take this one first. I see, and I truly believe and like try to live from a space of love, and like this is what we need to do for our young people. And I try to be very, very radically hopeful in my thinking. And when I look at this question, I think I'm imagining the haves and have-nots getting bigger. And this is coming from a lens of working in school districts that are well-resourced, and then working in a school district or even just a building within a district that has less funding for whatever reason. So I'm envisioning in a lot of our urban districts where we're serving a lot of young people and marginalized families that will have ways to feel like we're catching up to what I see young people in the more well funded school districts having. So for example, I imagine, and I know this because I've worked with principals and have conversations, that we see some funding opportunities for students with disabilities using that IDA money, that Part B money, for things like music therapy classes, right? You want to provide such inclusive environments for our young people, but how are we also taking care of them in other ways? So I envision things like that happening. And then in an under-resourced district, It's like we're buying the bare minimum for our young people, and that it puts us in this position of like, I don't know, I start asking, what is just? Like, is this really the way it should be for all of our young people? So it's a constant conversation in my own head and with my team. So Christopher, I'll hand it off to you, but
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I mean, I took some notes. The question, and this is a deep question, but it says, how does your positionality bias your epistemology, right? Meaning, how does your experience shape what you know about the world? And I think that in general, people only know what they've experienced, right? And so when I think about a well-resourced school division versus a under-resourced school division, it's like people don't really realize that one or the other actually exist. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. And so this guidance, I guess your question was, how does this enhance that? Like, this guidance helps our existing programs by just providing more opportunities, right? But I think the one part that I'm really excited about is the opportunity for increased professional development for our educators. That's a one way for our well-resourced areas, but that also applies for our under-resourced areas, because once a educator in an under-resourced area has the professional development and the opportunity to learn about the things that they're missing, kind of like what Nina was saying, then they can kind of begin to see the big picture or see the thing that the other people find to be naturally obvious. Does that make sense? And so it's an opportunity for cross-disciplinary projects, maybe to enhance our facilities, and just offer additional opportunities. In the under-resourced districts, I think it's a foundational tool that's going to help those districts to just know and know that they can get the things they need to just build that foundation so they can build upon what they already have.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I definitely want to make sure that we do at least one question from the audience. And I think that maybe this was initially for the Department of Education, but I feel like you both have expertise on this. So the question was, federal funding sources require a needs assessment, which includes data to support the need for a project. So could you talk to maybe the different kinds of data or like things that you all do behind the scenes to support and like bolster the case for having arts education funding in your districts?
Yeah, stakeholder engagement is everything. You know, I mean, in any scenario, when the parents and the students and the teachers have input, that's how we get things done. We can talk about the fact that we need to receive title funding all we want, but when the school board hears it from a group of parents, then that's a different level of engagement. And so the needs assessment piece, you all want to be careful in understanding when that is necessary and when it's not. I think it's a $30,000 differentiation to determine if you need the needs assessment. But I think a needs assessment is necessary for any arts leader, so you can just know what it is that you're trying to obtain or you're trying to do. So you got to have a plan, and then you can work towards that goal. So the needs assessment is a thing that I recommend everyone does, no matter what, so that you can make informed decisions for your program.
I'm thinking, like, speaking immediate, local here. I see parallels with this question about like funding and advocating within my own organization. And I think back to something Jamie said at the beginning, is that we have an education issue. And one of the things we're struggling with is, you know, taking care of our young people's hearts, souls, and minds, and humanizing spaces for human beings who we're putting ourselves in a place of historic institutionalization, like we're going back to the education problem. And the clearest way for me in my very direct, blunt manner when speaking with folks is that we want our young people to show up authentically. We want to elevate who they are, who they want to be, and who they want to grow to be. There is no better way to humanize a space than to center the arts, because the arts are central to being human. Like, that's it. So I'll leave it at that before I get a little too fired up.
No, that is wonderful and fantastic. I was just gonna, as we're coming to the end here, offer, is there just anything else that you either of you want to leave the audience with? Any like piece of advice for implementing the guidance, or any other thought that you have?
Yeah, I would just say I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the National Association for Music Education. And I have the opportunity to serve on the Music Program Leaders Council. And I have a couple of links that I think we're going to be able to share, where there are some success stories about school systems implementing the Title IV Part A funds, and just a toolkit that's been put together by NAFME to help different folks with obtaining the funds.
Okay, so I will leave folks with one simple experience I have had, that if I'm advocating for a certain thing and I even get a tiny little bit, right? Like, okay, we're going to provide $200,000 in Title IV funding. Okay, that's a little bit, but a large district that's getting me, our kids, some things. The question becomes to me when I look in the mirror is, what else can I do? And if there's something I can do outside of the organization, because we have to build systems that are going to offer these supports. So it can't be about a person who says, we have a great superintendent who's all about music and arts education, deciding that this is going to be part of our strategic plan. No, I want a seat at the table. I'm middle management, but hello, I'm here and I want to speak on behalf of the arts and what our young people need. So that is like the in, but then also too, are we ever going to have proper funding to really do what's right by our young people? If not, then I have to figure out a way to do that outside of the organization. So whether that's partnering to create a nonprofit or a foundation or a fund, because that is something that is living well beyond the tenure of a person in a position.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. I just put the links that Chris mentioned into the chat for the audience. And again, thank you both so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. We all very much appreciate it. And I'm going to hand things back over to my colleague Tushar for our panel of national partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Appreciate our panelists and all that they do at the local level to advance arts education. Our final panel includes representatives from some of our national partners that were just incredibly invaluable in helping ensure that the Department of Education ultimately issued this guidance. We have experts with many years of experience. Our first panelist I'd like to introduce is Amanda Karhus, who is the Assistant Executive Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at National Association for Music Education. Lynn Tuttle, who is Executive Director and CEO of the American String Teachers Association. Mario Rosero, Executive Director of National Arts Education Association, and Heather Noonan, Vice President for Advocacy at the League of American Orchestras. Hi, friends, and thank you so much for joining us to close out this, this incredible webinar. Heather, I'd love to start with you. Can you start us off just talking generally about the importance of advocacy over the years to get this guidance issued, and some background of how advocacy helped ensure that this arts education guidance was sent to the states?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm also bringing greetings from my colleagues at the Performing Arts Alliance, which includes our dance and theater friends and other multidisciplinary voices who've been instrumental in this effort at the federal level. Just to very quickly step back, the fundamental purpose of federal education law is to close equity gaps and access to a complete education for all kids. So it's important to remember that is the aim of these resources. And that's really what we had in mind as advocates at the federal level, but also is core to the conversation of what we do with this at the local and state level. So the primary goal in our groups working collectively on an agenda at the federal level, both in ensuring that those appropriations that you heard earlier continue to flow, but also speaking up when this underlying law is rewritten and reimagined, is to think about how that federal window can open big doors at the local and state level. So one of the things that we brought forward in advocating for renewed guidance about eligibility in these areas, since as the point was made earlier, and Patrick, really want to thank you for bringing forward that 2013 letter. We too see it as a definitive and enduring piece of guidance for use at the state and local level. But our main idea was to really understand how could we open up new policy opportunities. And also, I think what we heard from Christopher and Nina too, is that there's really not as much clarity at the local and state level where most education policy decisions are made about the availability of these resources. So what we did was essentially partner with local advocates. All of you, I think, were engaged in some way or another who are participating in this call, and letting your elected officials know that more clarity was needed. Also working through our friends at the Arts Education Partnership, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the U.S. Department of Education to imagine how could we issue this clarity in the current context of the current law that we have. So a lot of the strategies we use work really well, I think, at the local level as well, which is we partner, as you can see here, and there are many voices beyond those of us here who partnered with us to make the case. But we fundamentally start with a conversation about what is the status of access to arts learning, where are the equity gaps, and what policy actions can help to close them. And I would just say, whether you're an in-school educator or a community-based partner, having that conversation and pulling information and arguments together with parents and others is what helps open the door to policy change.
Thank you, Heather, for that great response. Mario, if it's okay, I'd like to move on to you just to talk about if you have any specific tips that you've learned on these advocacy efforts, and maybe share one tip in particular on your efforts in securing ongoing meetings with the Department of Education.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Tushar. Greetings, everyone, from the National Art Education Association. Happy to be here. I think there's a couple things, and one is there's real value in this allyship and partnership across the art forms. We are more similar than we are different, and I think all of us working together in tandem help to unify a voice and an ask, and we're really happy to see, I loved Heather's language, this renewed guidance, right? That helps to refresh this in the minds of decision makers, but also those on the ground fighting for the arts every day. The advocacy tip that I often use is, consistency and having the next conversation is always essential and critical. So one of the things I always do is at the end of the meeting with that decision maker or the person you're advocating with and for the things that are on your wish list, is to always leave 5 minutes to schedule that next meeting so that you can ensure that the conversation is continuing. Spent a lot of time calendaring, which seemed to pay off. And I think on a bigger scale, as I listened and saw the questions in the Q&A feature, is we probably can't underscore enough that whether you're in the district or a partner to a school district, if you're fighting for the arts, the value of having the data and coming together around a solidified plan that has strategy behind it ensures that you're ready when these funding opportunities are available, or when you are working with your district to secure that funding. When you have the plan and strategy in place and you're working with your partners, you're more likely to have that funding go towards the arts. So that would be the second thing I'd reiterate. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. It was just such, just something I actually didn't think about, just, scheduling that next meeting works for my 14-year-old teenage daughter too. Lynn, you have a lot of experience and expertise in understanding the flow of federal funds to states and then to local school districts. Can you explain that process and how to use the guidance within that process?
Sure. Thanks, Tushar, and thanks again to all of the amazing panelists we've had so far as part of this webinar. Patrick did a really good job sort of laying out that for the formula funds, once the appropriations have been set at the federal level, there's a certain amount by formula that goes to the states, and then the states will determine by formula what will go down to the districts. In the case of Title I, what will go to the school level. And while you think, well, that's great, so the funds are just going to come down. Well, you actually have to have a plan in place, as Mario spoke of. The school district has to put forward a plan for the use of these funds, which then gets approved typically at your state Department of Education. And that's where this guidance is so genius, right? What the guidance says is it gives permission to the districts to include the arts within their applications and in their plans. And then it gives the state folks who are going to sign off on those plans and allow the funds to flow, it gives them permission to do so. And as Tushar knows, I like to go back to the law itself. The law already gives all of this permission, but since folks typically don't think about spending these formula funds in support of arts education, districts and states tend to be very conservative and do what they've always done before with these funds. So what this guidance does is it gives them permission. It gives the districts permission to have this conversation with their community members and arts education advocates about how the arts can be part of the support for an equitable and amazing education for all of our children. And it gives the states permission to sign off on that as they allow the funds to flow down to the districts.
Thank you, Lynn. Very helpful. Amanda, National Association for Music Education, has an array of tools to offer related to federal funds and music education. Can you share some of those with the audience and how they might relate to the guidance that was just issued?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Tushar. And I know Chris included a couple of the Title IV resources. I'll talk about some of the others. First of all, the national organizations that represent dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts. We've partnered the past 2 years with the NAM Foundation to conduct a survey to find out how districts and schools are using their federal funds to support their programs. So I think somebody from AFDA is going to put the 2003 report into the chat. But just to highlight a couple of those examples, they have been able to purchase instruments, art supplies, instructional materials. Some of them have increased staffing for arts educators and provided content-specific professional development, which we hear from our members is very lacking in many school districts around the country. They've also been able to use the funds for facility upgrades and for after-school and summer enrichment opportunities. And this is where a lot of them are partnering with other local nonprofit organizations to provide those services in school. I will make a plug that we're in the process of collecting data for the 2023-24 school year. So those of you who are in districts at the school level, even those of you who are arts advocates and partner, we really are encouraging you to fill out that survey. Let us know how the funds are being used, but even if they're not, tell us about what those unmet needs are that could be supported with additional federal funding. And like Heather mentioned, we've done a lot of advocacy around this, and these stories have been so important in getting the guidance released and having those examples about how other schools and districts are accessing the funds, but also in our advocacy to increase appropriations for these programs. So that would be my plea.
Thank you, Amanda. Heather, could you speak a little bit to the role that community providers play in the arts education space and how they can benefit from this guidance?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I think Olivia's already submitted a couple of links in the chat to the way that we talk with our community of orchestras about that work. But community-based arts education providers can be really important partners in the ecosystem, both delivering arts learning, but also in advocating for a strong and consistent commitment to arts education in the schools. And I would say the kind of resources that we've been talking about today are really taking a look at what's happening at the community level in school arts education, and where federal resources aren't being used to support that. And community-based organizations can be really helpful, not just in partnering to support how that's happening, but also a conversation at a policy level in the local community about what's needed and what's yet to be supported. So one of the kind of beginning points for us at the federal level has been to ask the question, what data is known about the status of arts education in our schools? Without that information about the equity gap, I hear some chat, or I see the chat taking place too about various subjects of arts learning that are more or less represented at the school level. That conversation really should start with a complete picture of what's being delivered in the schools. So that you can then move on to the conversation about what needs need to be addressed. And community-based providers can be really helpful in triggering that conversation, calling for that conversation. I also know that parents whose students are involved in community-based programs are also very concerned about what's happening at the in-school level as well. So what Patrick and Jennifer were saying about parental engagement and these policy conversations at the local level can also be supported by community-based providers. So it's just a couple of ideas. And I also just want to mention, I think there were some great questions about this moment as being, part of it is really about a policy moment we see with this new levy. What kind of comes after that policy understanding is then the grant access conversation that's also being discussed today. So I think it's important to look at it through those two different lenses. And start first with your policy conversation so you can understand how to navigate those grant opportunities.
Thank you, Heather. Mario, what are some of the challenges that your members are facing post-pandemic? And I guess a related question here is that I'm seeing a couple of questions for lack of support for the visual arts. What are some of those problems, and how would you go about trying to address them?
Yeah, thanks, Tushar. You know, I know my colleagues across art forms share in this concern. One of the things that I think we've really faced is recruitment and retention challenges. And so for the visual arts, we just did a task force and a report with a set of recommendations that I'm hoping Olivia can pop into the chat. I know that music has done that as well, but we're really looking at not only how do we best serve and retain our current arts educators across all disciplines, but also how do we welcome new and fresh art educators into the field. And so thinking about that continuum is a big part of our work while we maintain the sort of constant drumbeat of all of the advocacy efforts and all the policy efforts, is also to think about the sustainability of the field. A lot of that, I think, comes down to exactly what we're talking about today, which is about resource, right? Do the arts educators in schools have the resources they need to do their jobs? And so again, to emphasize our points about having that data and that strategy and those plans, one of my simple pieces of advice is always to ensure that there's an art specialist on the school improvement plan team, right? Be on the school leadership team, the SLT, include the arts in your SIP, your school improvement plan. use the smaller policy maneuvers that you can locally to embed and ensure that the arts are strong and existing across like the fabric of the organization. And that helps to build some infrastructure to get those larger wins. To the question, I saw the question around, you know, we don't have a visual arts investment in our school district. We have more of a music investment. From my perspective, there's no such thing as a school district that's one art form and not another art form, right? We're here to say that our job is to ensure that all young people, regardless of their zip code, deserve access to a broad range of arts education and arts experiences. I can't predict as an adult which art form is going to work for which child, right? So I happen to love visual arts and theater, but if I had had access to that instrumental instruction in 3rd grade, it might have changed my life. So I think we have to really make sure that we're providing a broad range. The person that asked that question, we can make sure we have a direct follow-up, happy to provide resources, but this group here is really championing access across the art forms for every young person so that they can make those decisions for themselves as they progress through their academic career.
Great, thank you, Mario. Just 2 quick questions and we'll get you out of here. Lynn, we're getting some questions on career and technical education, as well as individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. What are some ways to advocate for those funding streams?
Great question, and I have limited knowledge here, so others feel free to chime in as well. Like the funds that come through ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, there are formula funds that come down to the state and then down to the districts. For career and technical education, it's also tied to where your state sees job opportunities into the future, and that of course can include music and arts education career paths. So you're going to want to engage probably with the career and technical education folks at your state education agent, State Department of Education, to learn how it is that they're thinking about that. Are they including the arts as part of the career and technical education pathways offered in your state? There's some states that do this beautifully, and there are examples out there. I'm thinking of New Jersey, Colorado, California, who all have track records doing that if you want to borrow from other states in that space. And similarly, you can have these conversations with your career and technical education director at your school district or at your local high school. They'll know what's around in the state, what possibilities might be there, and you may be able to open their eyes to the types of jobs that are available and careers that are available in the arts in your local community and in your state, because they're going to want to begin with that information. For IDEA, often this comes down to that individual students IEP, individual education plan. And one was a brilliant State Department of Ed people I ever worked with spoke about how she would always work with parents to counsel that the arts get written in to a student's IEP. So if a student has special needs, that we make certain that they have an opportunity and written into their individualized education program is that they will access arts education, that they will be in those music classes or art classes with appropriate supports. And so that's something you can advocate for in your local community, put forward some best practice examples if they already exist. And that should help then open up funding to make certain that those students do have equitable access to the arts in their schools.
Thank you, Lynn. Amanda, I'm going to give you the last word here and maybe speak a little bit about the intersection of IDEA and music and arts. I know that your organization was actively involved in legislation that was introduced this year. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Tushar, this actually was because we had music educators advocating on Capitol Hill. A group was meeting with Congressman David Scott from Georgia and was actually talking to them about him and his staff about Title IV funding. And we're sharing an example of a school district that was using their Title IV funding specifically to provide professional development for arts educators to better support students with disabilities in their classroom. And so it inspired him to want to introduce the bill. It's called the Reimagining Inclusive Arts Education Act, and it would essentially create a new competitive grant program where districts would have to apply for that funding in order to provide that kind of support to educators. But again, it's also an allowable use of Title IV and probably IDEA and Title II for that kind of content, specific professional development for arts educators.
Great. Thank you all for closing us out on this content. You all are just invaluable to the in the arts education advocacy space, and I'm also glad to call you friends. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We're going to close out just quickly with a couple of items. There is no better way to support the guidance that was issued than asking Congress to support arts education in those various funding streams that we talked about. The Congress will be back after the election to discuss fiscal year 2025 funding. So reaching out to your member of Congress right now is incredibly valuable. Next slide. We'd love for you to join us for our next webinar, which is our post-election impact webinar. We'll be talking about how the election impacts not just arts education, but arts in general. And not just at the federal level, but we'll go into some depth on state and local elections as well. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And then finally, we hope that you will join us next June 11th to 14th, 2025 for AFTACON. This is our conference in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's a 4-day jam-packed peer-driven content crafted by and for the local arts ecosystem. We've even crafted some opportunities for you to get out and enjoy the arts and culture scene in Cincinnati. There is a link there. We can also certainly follow up with registrants here on more information on that. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that not all questions were answered here, but we will answer those questions unanswered and follow up with you on that. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.